Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Deeper Bible Podcast. Right now, we're studying the book of Revelation, end of the Bible. Fascinating, scary. Today, we're in chapter 7, and I'm sitting here with my friend Lindsay, and we both appropriately wore our white sweatshirts.
Sure did.
Because we're gonna, it totally wasn't planned.
Nope.
But the heavenly multitude is dressed in white.
Yeah.
But they've laundered their clothes in blood, which is why it's white, as an intro to the trippy symbolic world of the book of Revelation.
Yep.
So we're going to get right into it.
Okay.
Ready?
I'm ready.
So as always with the Bible, you start at the beginning of a chapter.
Yeah.
You can't start reading right away. You've got to look prior and say, wait a minute, where am I picking up?
Yes.
So you can't understand Revelation 7 until you say, where did chapter 6 end? The Lamb, Jesus, the lion lamb, is opening the seals of a scroll. They're like these confidentiality clay rings. He's opening those. Destruction's being released. And at the end of chapter 6, the 6th seal is opened. So can you read that for us?
Yeah. We'll pick up there. Okay. So Revelation chapter 6, starting in verse 12. As I looked, he opened the 6th seal. There was a great earthquake. The sun turned black like sackcloth. The whole moon became like blood, and the stars were falling from heaven onto the earth as when a fig tree, shaken by a strong wind, drops its late fruit. The heaven disappeared like a scroll being rolled up, and every mountain and island was moved out of its place. The kings of the earth, the leading courtiers, the generals, the rich, the power brokers, and everyone, slave and free, all hid themselves among the caves and rocks of the mountains. Fall upon us, they were saying to the mountains and the rocks. Hide us from the face of the one who sits on the throne and from the anger of the Lamb. The great day of their anger has come, and who can stand upright?
Right. So pretty charged scene.
Yes.
In the last episode, we unpacked what's this language of the sun going black and the moon like blood.
Mm-hmm.
So much of this is based in the Old Testament, in a temple cosmology. So we're not going to rehash all that here. That's in the last episode.
Okay.
But what's important is where it ends. That we've come to the day of God's wrath. Who can stand? Who's going to possibly survive this?
Mm-hmm.
And Revelation 7 is the answer to that question. Here's who can stand. So
Okay.
will you read the first verse of chapter 7 for us?
Chapter 7, verse 1.
Mm-hmm.
After this, I saw 4 angels standing at the 4 corners of the earth, holding back the 4 winds of the earth to stop any wind from blowing on the earth, or on the sea, or on any tree.
Okay, so first of all, we see 4 angels standing. It's a form of the same verb in Greek.
Mm-hmm.
So who can stand? Wait a minute. Now we've got 4 angels standing, and instead of releasing wind, they're holding things back. There seems to be, well, let's keep going. But are we seeing a pause in the destructive activity?
Yeah.
Yes is the answer, but let's read the next 2 verses.
Verse 2. And I saw another angel coming up from the east, holding the seal of the living God. He shouted in a loud voice to the 4 angels who had responsibility for harming the earth and the sea. Don't harm the earth just yet, he shouted, or the sea, or the trees. Don't do it until we have sealed the servants of our God on their foreheads. It's a big moment.
It's a very big moment.
Yeah.
So there is this, in answer to the question, who can possibly stand?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is going to be those who are sealed with the seal of God.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a couple things. This is a different type of seal than the seal on a scroll. The seal on the scroll, remember, was sort of like for confidentiality, these clay things. This seal of the living God is like, like a monarch would have their signet ring, and you'd stamp something or mark something as belonging to somebody, and therefore receiving special treatment or something. Like in Montana where I grew up, ranchers would brand their cattle.
Right.
So that if they got lost, they'd say, oh, this is Farmer Bob's up the road because he's got the mark.
Mm-hmm.
Or, on my Bibles, I have engraved RJG, my initials, so that people know, oh, this belongs to somebody.
Yeah.
So there's a mark put on, a seal of belonging. This is important, first of all, because when we think of a mark in the book of Revelation, everybody always jumps to Revelation 13 and the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
But long before we get to the mark of the beast, we have the mark or the seal on God's beloved ones.
Yeah.
And so at 3 points in the book of Revelation, there's these kind of intermission moments that give us a snapshot of what is the role of the saints in all this? Where are God's people in the midst of this layered chaos that happens in chapter 7, chapters 10 and 11, and again in chapter 20? So right here in chapter 7, we're in the intermission between the opening of the 6th seal on the scroll and the 7th seal. And then in between that, the people of God are sealed, but in a different way. So it's a bummer, actually, because we can get these different concepts of seal mixed up in our head.
Yeah.
But there's, as with almost everything in the book of Revelation, there's important Old Testament precedent to understand what's going on here.
Yeah.
So in Genesis chapter 4, after the first murder, brother kills brother, what happens next? Cain says, oh no, I'm going to be a wanderer, and anybody who finds me is going to kill me, which presupposes, like, wait a minute, are there other humans? Who else is out there? So that's a whole nother question. Go back to our Genesis episodes. But God,
I could get lost there.
Yeah.
Okay. Reel us in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But God says, it's very strange. In fact, let me just read it.
Okay.
So this is Genesis chapter 4. Let me find it here. Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you've driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive, a wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me. This is Genesis. I just read Genesis 4:14, verse 15. Then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So God puts a mark of favor to say, well, your violence probably will boomerang on you, but I'm going to spare you from that with a mark.
Okay.
So just so the saints or the people of God are being given a mark that will spare them from a sort of a total catastrophe. And of course, in the Old Testament, there's a few other instances of this. Probably the most important is the story of the Passover lamb.
Yes.
God sends the destroyer over the land of Egypt, but the people of Israel mark their doors with the blood of a lamb. That's not insignificant for the book of Revelation.
Right.
The blood of the lamb is the mark that says, do not destroy this household.
Yep.
But then in Ezekiel chapter 9, there's a very interesting passage. So Ezekiel is in the exile, and he has this crazy vision of the presence of God is leaving the temple. You know, God, it's not just that the people have been exiled, it's that God is saying, I am out. And in that scene, and when God leaves, of course, chaos is being unleashed on the people of Israel. You know, it's very, very violent. But in that scene, let me just find this for you. Ezekiel 9, verses 4 through 6. The Lord said to Ezekiel, pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it. So the righteous ones who are saying, oh my, Jerusalem's going totally the way of the idolaters, and that bugs me. And God says, put a mark on them. To the others, he said in my hearing, pass through the city after him, strike. Your eye shall not spare, you shall show no pity. Kill old men outright, young men and maidens, little children and women, but touch not one on whom is the mark. And they began at the sanctuary, so they began with the elders before the house of the Lord, and so forth. So again, it's the same template. Total destruction, but the ones with the mark are spared.
Okay.
Yes?
Yeah. Is there a reason? I mean, is this just a language thing where it's called a seal here instead of a mark? Or is...
That's a good question. The underlying words are different.
Okay.
But the basic idea is an identifying symbol of some sort.
Okay.
You know, interestingly, in the book of Exodus, the high priest of Israel, in Exodus 28, he's got something on his forehead that says, Kadosh LaAdonai, holy to the Lord. And it's on his forehead. And it's marking him out as separate for the purposes of God. In the book of Habakkuk, we also get this idea, but where people are marked out for destruction.
Yeah.
Not just for saving, but for condemnation. In extra biblical literature around this time, the Psalms of Solomon, which was probably written in the century before Jesus showed up on the scene, probably in response to the Romans coming in the 60s to, Pompey the Great came and took over Jerusalem, and it was a time of great turmoil and inner fighting among the Jews. And in chapter 15 of the Psalms of Solomon, you could look it up online, it talks about a mark being given to two sets of people. Those who are faithful, they shall be saved and spared. Those who are unfaithful, and they shall be swept away. So the point here is John is speaking a language that's got precedent, both within the Bible and in extra biblical Jewish literature at the time. Secondly, that when we come to the book of Revelation, we have to realize everyone's marked.
Yeah.
Marking is inevitable, whether you have the mark of the anti-Messiah, the beast, or the mark for the children of God. Everybody is going to ultimately choose where their loyalty is. Where is their character is being made in the image of what?
Yeah.
And that will determine their ultimate destiny. So yeah, I find that all pretty darn fascinating. Do you have any questions about that, or?
No, not right now.
Okay.
Not yet. We can keep trucking along.
All right. Why don't you read the next little bit then?
Okay. Chapter 7, verse 4 through 8. I heard the number of people who were sealed. It was 140,000 who were sealed from all the tribes.
144,000.
Oh my goodness. Okay, there you go. Who were sealed from all the tribes of the children of Israel. 12,000 were sealed from the tribe of Judah, 12,000 from the tribe of Reuben, 12,000 from the tribe of Gad, 12,000 from the tribe of Asher, 12,000 from the tribe of Naphtali, 12,000 from the tribe of Manasseh, 12,000 from the tribe of Simeon, 12,000. It is a tongue twister. 12,000 from the tribe of Levi, 12,000 from the tribe of Issachar, 12,000 from the tribe of Zebulun, 12,000 from the tribe of Joseph, and 12,000 from the tribe of Benjamin. That is the number that were sealed. Okay.
Excellent.
All right.
So, again, for Torah literate Jewish Christians, you read a list like that and ping, your mind goes to the beginning of the book of Numbers.
Yes.
Where there's a military census, all the tribes.
Yep.
And what's interesting is a couple things. First, that number 144,000. That's 12 squared. 12 times 12. And again, in this sort of numerological symbolism in the book of Revelation, just like we talked about the number 7, 12 squared is getting at the idea of completion, totality.
Okay.
It points forward to the New Jerusalem at the end of the book, chapters 21 and 22, where it talks about the city of God has 12 gates that are named after the 12 tribes, those same tribes. And the foundations of those gates are named after the 12 apostles.
Okay.
So it's pointing forward there. The other thing to notice is how John leads into this. He says, and I heard the number, right?
I didn't see it, yeah.
He doesn't see it yet. We're going to turn to that in just a moment. But just like in chapter 5, where John's weeping and saying, who can open the scroll? And one of the elders says, don't cry. The Lion of Judah is able to do it. He hears about the lion.
Okay.
And it's sort of this military dominant sort of thing. Just so he hears this specific number, and it's sort of this roll call of the army, and it's a very big army.
Yeah.
But then what happens next? Now John is going to turn and see something that complicates and deepens what he has heard with the 144,000. So go ahead and would you read the next number of verses, actually?
So keeping going in verse 9. After this, I looked, and lo and behold, a huge gathering which nobody could possibly count, from every nation and tribe and people and language. They were standing in front of the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were dressed in white robes, holding palm branches in their hands. They were shouting out at the top of their voices, salvation belongs to our God, to the one who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. All the angels who were standing around the throne and elders and the four creatures fell down on their faces before the throne and worshiped God. Yes, amen, they were saying. Blessing and glory and wisdom and thanks and honor and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen. One of the elders spoke to me. Who are these people dressed in all white? He asked. Where have they come from? Sir, I replied, you know. These are the ones, he said, who have come out of the great suffering. They have washed their clothes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. That is why they are there in front of God's throne, serving him day and night in his temple. The one who sits on the throne will shelter them with his presence. They will never be hungry again or thirst again. The sun will not scorch them, nor will any fierce heat. The Lamb who is in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd. He will lead them to springs of running water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes.
Yeah, so there's a whole lot there.
There's a lot there.
So
okay.
John heard 144,000, but then he turns and sees. And right after he's like meticulous with his numbers, he says, oh, nobody could possibly count it.
Yeah.
It's just huge.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is in chapter 9, which will be a couple episodes from now, he talks about a group of people. He talks about an army that he counts that is 200 million. So obviously, he's like, I can count pretty high, or it's like he was like 10,000 times 2. But here he's just saying, I can't, it's beyond that. It's massive. And so, groups like the Jehovah's Witnesses have really fixated on the 144,000.
Sure.
Like there's 144,000 that are the priests or the bureaucrats in God's kingdom or whatever it is. But that's poor reading because because what John is doing here is taking this number of completion of the people of God and then blowing it up with this picture of an international Israel, an international covenant people from every tribe and language.
Yeah.
And so it's really, in the first century church where the Jew-Gentile conflict was real, and in our world today, it is expanding our notions of who's in and who's out. It is from the beginning of the Bible meant to be a global people of God. And what's also interesting is their clothes are white.
Yeah.
But the angel explains it's because they've washed in the blood of the Lamb.
Yeah.
So, first of all, obviously, when you put blood on a shirt, it gets red, not white.
Basically ruined. Yeah.
So it's, again, this paradox of power and weakness that we saw in chapter 5, where the conquering lion is, in fact, a slaughtered lamb. And here we learned that the 144,000 strong army is, in fact, white with the blood of the Lamb. So that means that they participate in this paradox of power and weakness, that the people of the Lamb share the character of the Lamb, that they conquer in the Lamb's fashion.
So not as an army.
Right. So we very often you can read Revelation and be like, all right, I'm going to hop in my tank and my helicopter and, in the name of God, start destroying people. But it often that really misses the character of the people of God in this book.
Yeah.
And often, just as Jesus preferred to be killed than to kill, so many times in Revelation when we get a snapshot of the people of God, they're martyrs. Like they chose to die rather than to make others die.
Right.
So the mode of conquering in this book participates in the cross, the way that God dealt with ultimate issues through suffering, self-giving love,
right,
rather than through the very forms of crass power that only amplify what's wrong with the world.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's really important to see that, and the connection between chapter 5 and chapter 7, time and again, John and the writers of the Bible in general recursively come around to some of the same mysteries and paradoxes and express them in different ways, but ways that if we see them together, we say, oh, it's still speaking about that central core issue, and it's still massaging our understanding of those core issues. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's starting to. Okay. Can we go back to the destruction parts? Why is the earth being destructed?
Yeah.
Why all this?
Because God hates the earth.
Why all this talk? Because we have everybody's saved here, but we have this part of the earth being destructed and then the 4 angels and
Yeah. It so there's I think there's 2 layers here.
Okay.
Very often, as we saw with the sun goes dark and the moon went red, and this is often a symbolic way of speaking of chaos in the world of human affairs.
Okay.
I think we use the example of September 11th was an earth-shattering event.
Yeah.
Did it shatter planet Earth? No, it didn't. But it was of such a magnitude, such a shift in the geopolitical order.
I see.
That the only way you could speak of it is through this big language. Yep. So there is a sense in which this destructive language is perhaps symbolic of profound, I don't know if you want to use the language of regime change, but profound shaking of the systems of the world. On the other hand, there is a sense, as we see in a passage like Romans chapter 8, in which the creation is groaning, and it's been turned over to futility, not willingly, but because of human rebellion.
Yeah.
There's a sense in which the very created non-human order needs renewal, needs purification. And it seems to be symbolizing that. Okay. We can never lose sight of the fact that in the Bible, matter, the world is good.
Yes.
It may need to be healed, but it is good. And God isn't angry at creation as such. He is angry at those who pollute creation, those who make other people's lives miserable. God is angry at that. And again, this is a universal problem. One of the questions that people bring to this chapter is, so is there in the end times, is there 144,000 Jews?
Right.
There's that many Jews and then all the other Gentiles.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a false contrast, that it's 2 ways of speaking about the same thing.
Sure.
It's speaking about an international people of God who are grafted into the story of Israel. And the reason that covenant needs that international scope is that human rebellion has an international scope.
Sure.
And so just as, Israel was God's solution to the problem of what went wrong with humanity writ large. And so when Abraham comes on the scene in the book of Genesis, this is kind of the point when the initial global scope of God's intentions narrows down onto one family. God says, I'm going to change strategy here, and I'm going to choose this one family, and they're going to bless the world. Okay, right. Then we get the very long story of Israel, but we can never lose sight of that global orientation at the beginning.
Right.
And then at the other end of that story, we get to Jesus, and like Abraham, he's one Jewish man on whom the covenant turns, but now with Jesus, it blasts out wide again to all the nations of the world.
Yeah.
And so we see that dynamic here in Revelation 7, but we can't treat symbols as if they're not symbolic, or we can't treat 144,000 with that sort of numerical perfection and sort of bring our spreadsheets to it and be like, okay, sure. Well, that's not what it's trying to do.
Right.
It's doing something different.
So in verse 10, it says, they were shouting at the top of their voices, salvation belongs to our God, the one who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. Can you speak to this rescue moment?
Yeah. So for any initial readers who know Hebrew, they'll know, okay, wait, the Lamb is Jesus, and Jesus, the name in Hebrew is Yeshua, is the same word for salvation, which is Yeshua. There's a little wrinkle there, but basically, Jesus means salvation, which the question is, what does salvation mean in the Bible? And we make a mistake if we overly narrow that down to the idea of go to heaven when you die.
Yeah.
It includes that.
Sure.
It includes the promise that when our physical bodies give out, our souls, the immaterial part of our being, which interacts with but is not reducible to our brain, goes to be with the presence of God for a time of rest and restoration and joy. But that's a holding place before we get new bodies, and there's a new heaven and a new earth and a recreation. That's the ultimate end game,
Yes.
the kingdom of God. Okay. Salvation, part of what that means in the Bible is the right to participate in that ongoing story rather than to go the other fork where you are choosing an eternity separated from all that is good and beautiful and true. But in the Bible, salvation means more than that. It doesn't just mean, oh, good, when I die. It means today, God has yanked me back from the ledge of my own self-destructive tendencies. The parts of my life that are fragmented, the missing pieces, he has restored wholeness. He has done for me what I could not possibly do for myself. I've been saved. When my power was extinguished, God's power was more. And so, and of course, when we locate it within the story of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, salvation meant things like return from exile. Just like we talked about, Ezekiel saw God's presence picking up and heading out of town.
Yeah.
The return of God's presence and the access of all the people to God's presence and all that it meant. It meant health. It meant joy. It meant unity. It meant freedom from oppression, both at the interpersonal level and at the broader international, systems level.
Yeah.
Salvation meant all of these things. And, Christians make a mistake. Usually we kind of choose one or the other.
Yeah.
And it is a both and. And that's not just kind of a sloppy answer. That is a biblical answer.
Yeah.
That is the only answer that does justice to the story being told from Genesis through the book of Revelation. So when they say salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb, they're speaking of a multi-layered rescue operation that takes the whole Bible to tell that story. And by the way, notice these people, they're washed in the blood of the Lamb.
Yeah.
And many of them in the prior chapter were the martyrs. And so salvation didn't mean, I'm going to spare you from all suffering. You're nothing's going to harm you. You're never going to have a bad day because you've been saved.
Right.
No, you're not going to be saved from suffering. You're going to be saved through suffering. And if we don't get this kind of stuff clear and teach it to our children, there's going to be profound cognitive dissonance moments as you try to live out the Christian life where you're like, wait a minute, why is this happening? I thought God would save me.
Yeah.
I thought God would protect me. I thought that part of the deal was, but you were starting from false premises and from a non-biblical or quasi-biblical, because you're bracketing out huge parts and cherry picking little bits, a quasi-biblical understanding of salvation. And that's why we're doing the Deeper Bible podcast, so that we can.
We
try
need to have a
understand
deeper
these
podcast for kids.
I would love that,
because taking some of those big ideas, okay, here's an example. I have a daughter right now who watched a thing about tornadoes. She's terrified of tornadoes now. And then the other little one,
tornadoes.
I think they're
I
fascinating.
want to be a storm chaser. In another life, I would be the guy in the van, with the camera sticking out the sunroof.
Yep.
That's me. But anyways,
we watched Twisters. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
nice.
I don't know if that was a good parenting move, but we watched it. So now, anyway, she's afraid of it. But the little one is like, but God. So I have two daughters. The younger 8-year-old encouraging the almost 10-year-old that God loves us and he's, he doesn't want to hurt us. And I'm like, in my head, I'm like, yes. But there are things that happen, and trying to wrestle some of those things is tricky.
It is.
When parenting,
it is.
Yeah.
But if you can't, one of the things that I've learned is that complexity or verbal complexity is the hallmark of people who don't know what they're talking about. Simplicity is the mark of real clarity, like of having Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. or his dad, I can't remember, Supreme Court Justice, famous people around the turn of the 20th century. Anyways, Americans said, I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side of complexity. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, I would give my whole life.
Ooh.
And so there's like 3 buckets here. There's like the simplicity of like airheads who never thought about nothing.
Yeah.
Then there's the realm of complexity, and it's complex. And you can never really come to a clear answer because for every answer there's a counterpoint.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, how can I say anything? You're stuck. But then on the far side of complexity, there's a second simplicity, or what some have called like a second naivete. Like there's a clarity on the far side. Anyways, if you can't reach that, that's what you need to teach children the Bible.
Yeah.
Let's just say that.
Yeah.
Not claiming to have that, but let's give it a whack. So things like tornadoes, hurricanes, volcanoes, tsunamis, earthquakes here in California, these are, a type of evil because they destroy human lives, but they're not, they're natural. They're not, it's not like, wow, dad lost his job because the bank did something to his loan structure because the Fed changed the interest rates because there's human evil that sifts down through systems or whatever, but then there's natural evil, like the tornado.
Yeah.
And, when you look at creation, and I grew up in the Rocky Mountains, and you see stunning peaks, but how were these things created? Through glaciers, through epic floods that ripped away whole mountainsides, through, you go to the ocean, you go to Land's End in San Francisco, and it's just stunning, and you say, wow, how did this gorge get created? Well, through the erosion of rivers and through, God uses natural force as his paintbrush to create the world, and as his chisel as he's making amazing things.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense in which, seen in itself, something like a tornado and it's just raw power, I want to see an F5 someday, is like, you could see it at the level of, well, this is part of the dynamism that God has created in this world. I mean, sometime, like, just Google, I was the other day having an AI conversation with ChatGPT.
I love that.
about the temperature of the core of the Earth.
Okay.
And it's like as hot as the sun, the core of the Earth. And what would happen if the temperature changed just a little bit? If it got a little hotter or a little colder?
That'd be wild.
And what's interesting is if it got a little hotter, the volcanic activity would go bonkers. If it got a little colder, the plates of the Earth would cease to shift. There would be kind of a slowing down of a lot of the, I don't fully understand this, but the interlocking relations of the oceans with the jet streams, with, the land mass, all that stuff, it is fine-tuned in a profound way.
Yep.
I think the upshot is, when you're talking to your daughters, is that someday when God heals the world, things like tornadoes may still exist, but they're not going to do harm to anybody that God loves.
Right.
God may still use them as he continues to make beautiful things, but they're not going to be evil.
Yeah.
And how exactly is that going to work? Well, we don't know the policy procedures yet.
Sure.
But I don't know. That's
helpful. That's definitely helpful. And trying to explain it to those little minds, like.
Yeah. I have a niece. She's 6. She's super smart.
Yeah.
She asks all these questions. And I love it.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's wonderful.
I do too. I do too. My youngest even, we'll get back to Revelation in a sec, but she asked a question. She's like, sometimes it's hard to believe in God. Sometimes it's tricky. Like, and I'm like, that's great that you're even asking that question. Yeah. We welcome these questions. And that's why podcasts like this exist, because some of this stuff is hard to grapple with and wrap your head around. And,
Charles Taylor's this philosopher that I've learned from a lot of people have. And he has this big book called A Secular Age. And his basic question is, how is it possible that 500 years ago in the West, it was just the default to believe in God? Everybody believed in God. But now we live in a world where, sure, you can still believe in God, but you do know that that's one of a number of options. And how did we get there?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting story to be told. Another author has talked about how we live in a time where there's like a secondhand smoke of doubt in our culture, and we all breathe it in.
Yeah.
You can't avoid breathing in doubt and skepticism because it's just in the air.
Yeah.
And so if for our kids we make taboo like oh my gosh, I thought that maybe God didn't exist, and now what does that say about my eternal salvation? And I say that because those kinds of questions bothered my OCD mind as a little kid, and I couldn't sleep at night. So it's really important that you normalize these kinds of questions, but that we also have good answers.
Yes.
And answers from the Bible, but that are pointing them to the Bible long-term as a book for adults, as a book that will grow with them, a book that they will grow into. We can't dumb this down.
Yeah.
We actually have to grow them up.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So. There's one last detail that I want to talk about. It's actually one of my favorites, but where God wipes every tear. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So let's see. Yeah, it's in verse 17. For the Lamb in the midst of the throne will be their shepherd. So that's a cool inversion where the Lamb, who's usually part of the herd, is
that's
now
interesting.
actually the shepherd of the herd.
Yeah.
Will guide them to springs of living water. This whole all of this is soaked in Old Testament, Psalm 91, Isaiah 4. All of this stuff has hyperlinks. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That quotes from Isaiah. It points forward to the new heavens and the new earth, chapter 21, 22. And it's so important to keep this action of God in mind and to anchor our understanding of God right here, because when we read Revelation, sometimes like Revelation in our mind is coded as like, and God smashes everything. That's kind of the end of the story. Yes, God is rightly irritated, is taking appropriate action to not just kind of fix a little thing here or there, but like thoroughgoing overhaul, problem solved. Okay. And that's motivated by justice, by holiness, by beauty, all these things. Okay. But who is the God who's doing this? He's the God whose characteristic action is to get off his throne and to come down and, as I do with my daughter, wipe gently the tears out of her eyes and say, it's going to be okay. I've got you. I love you. And so here in this intermission, it's almost like the eye of the storm in many ways in Revelation, where we kind of like, we get this pause, we get this promise of security, this promise of confidence to the people of God. You are going to make it through. God will protect you. And he is the one who ultimately will make all bad things go away. And that God does that in humility. He's not up there thundering with his lightning bolt. He's kneeling. He is Jesus.
Yeah.
And I think that just being sure that we return time and again, who is God? This is God. Because how we answer that question, who is God, will determine what kind of lives we end up living, what kind of families we end up leading, what kind of communities we end up creating. God is a God of self-emptying love, mercy. And that is, I think that's a really good place to end before we turn into chapters 8, when the 7th seal is opened.
Yeah.
And there will be 7 trumpets, and there will be pits of destruction and angels tossed. I mean, it goes on.
Yeah.
But here we see a window into God's providential care for his people.
It's beautiful. That's beautiful.
Lindsay, thank you for this as always. I love it when we get to talk Bible.
Yep, me too.
And thank you guys for joining us. I hope this was helpful. We had fun. I hope you had fun. And send us any questions you have. You can go to our website, deeperbiblepodcast.com. You can leave a comment on our YouTube, or leave a review, add like, share with your friends, all the stuff. We'd be grateful. You can even give us money. We do need financial support, so if that's in your heart, do it. My recommended gift is $5,000. And you can do that through our website. And just kidding, but seriously, God bless you. As the rabbis say, shalom, homies. Okay, bye.